So you're all welcome back, guys. So this morning I talked about, old theories of the problem of evil. I visited a few of the major ones that I've come across. In the second lecture right now, I want to talk about my own theory. I've tried to put together all of the old ones that make sense to me, and also to add a few more of my own to give a more kind of a complete picture of the problem we face. And obviously it's just my own theory. It's not exhaustive. It may be exhausting, but not exhaustive. So you should all have it before you then, the outline of lecture 2. So you can see we're going to have to try and cover a lot of territory in this lecture. So I'm going to start off with the definition of evil, my own definition of evil. And then I'm going to look at what I consider to be the 8 main sources of evil. The first one I call angering the gods. The second one, the notion of personal and collective karma. Thirdly, the powers of the heavens. Fourthly, free will added to advancing technology. 5, the loss of spirituality. 6, evil as an emergent phenomenon, and I'll obviously explain that. 7, evil as service to self. And then 8, evil as projection. So that's what I hope to get to, in the course of this lecture. So it's a lot of ground to cover, so bear with me. So when I think about evil per se, I've been trying to come up with what is a kind of a pithy explanation or, understanding of it. So my own definition will be the following, that evil is the energy which is born and nurtured when beings who have free will continually make choices for selfishness. So if I were to try to encapsulate all of these sources I'm going to cover now, this for me would be the essence of all of them, that evil is the energy which is born and is nurtured by beings who have free will and continually make choices for selfishness. That'll be the core of all of these pieces. So with that definition then in hand, I'm going to try to look at the sources, and see if we can compile a composite picture. So the first one then I would call angering the gods. And I want to emphasize here that these are gods whom we have created in our own image and likeness, because we pretend to worship gods and we make the claim that we're built in their image and likeness. But in actual fact, almost every group of people in every religion has created a god or gods, plural, in their own image and likeness. And so the first source of evil then in this model is that somehow we angered these gods or this god. And I'm going to mention a few different ways in which this might happen. The first one is the notion of sin. And I've spoken about this in recent homilies. So the first notion of sin, I believe, was the notion of the breach of a taboo. And a taboo was a kind of what in Judaism they called a fence around the Torah, a way of protecting people against accidental encounters with the divine. Because to accidentally encounter the divine, we read in the Hebrew scriptures, it is a terrible thing to fall into the hands of the living God. So those who are uninitiated and somehow have experiences or encounters with the divine, one or two things is going to happen. They're going to go mad. And they'll never be able to begin to operate in this waking consciousness because they don't know how to be in the two spaces. Or the second possibility is inflation. Look at me, I've had this great encounter with God. I'm separate, I'm different from everybody else. And so the taboo was put in place by the elders to make sure that the uninitiated didn't accidentally have encounters with the divine for which they were not prepared, and therefore wind up, as ultimate narcissists or totally crazy people who couldn't operate anymore in the kind of the real world. So I believe that was the first notion of sin, the breach of the taboo. At some stage, it became a question of individual gods made individual covenants with individual tribes. I believe that there were kind of 3 kinds of gods originally. There were kind of what I call locational gods who operated in particular pieces of real estate, like Israel or Ireland or Saudi Arabia or whatever. And when you went into their territory, you had to be obedient to those particular gods. If you left and went to a different territory, there was a different god that you had to pay respect to. So the first one would have been kind of what I would call regional divinities. The second kind would be kind of portfolio gods, gods who specialized in particular activities like art or farming or warfare. And the third kind of gods would be, I call them tribal divinities, gods who attached themselves to particular tribes. And even if these were nomadic peoples, the gods followed them around. Now, whichever group you were with, very, very often, there tended to be the community making a covenant with their particular divinity. And then if you were in breach of the covenant, that was the second kind of iteration of a version of sin. So sin was the breaking of the covenant. And this was what was called a corporate singularity. If a single member of the tribe broke the covenant, the entire tribe was guilty. And you see this coming through in the scriptures very, very definitely. So the idea that you would say, I'm not the person who broke the covenant, it was John Smith, so don't punish me, punish John Smith. That would be the equivalent to somebody who committed a murder by shooting somebody with a revolver and then claiming in the court case that he wasn't guilty. It was only his right index finger that pulled the trigger. So the rest of them should be set free. And he was willing to let go of his right index finger, amputate that, and we'll all be happy. So that's what the notion of corporate singularity was. And it continues down to our own time. We continue to visit this where we we have an issue with a particular leader and we go in and we kill hundreds of thousands of people to get rid of the guy. So that would have been the second iteration of sin. The third iteration then would be the breach of a particular commandment, that many of these gods gave slates of laws that you had to keep. And if you broke a law, then evil resulted. And the first great code of law-giving was called the Code of Ur-Nammu. It comes from about 2100 BCE from Sumeria. Some years later, a second code called the Code of Hammurabi, which came around 1776 BCE, and it's called the Code of Hammurabi. It's very, very well known. Then you have the Code of Moses around 1250 BCE. So these were kind of compilations of laws. In the case of Moses, it was 613 precepts. And so if you were in breach of any one of these laws, then, the God got really upset with you and visited all kinds of indignities upon your person or upon the group. So sin was one way in which we angered the gods, committing sin. The notion of culpability grew out of that. And as I read through the Judeo-Christian scriptures, I've identified 7 different stages of the notion of culpability. The first one I call passing the apple, where Adam and Eve sin, but none of them will take responsibility. God says, why did you do this to Adam? And Adam says, it's not my fault. It's her, the woman you gave me. She tempted me. And then he says to her, why did you do it? And she says, it wasn't me. It was the serpent. And God says, why did you do it? Well, you created me. So nobody will take responsibility. So the first stage is, I call it passing the apple. The second stage then is the corporate singularity model that I've just mentioned, that one person is guilty, everybody is guilty. And so for the sin of Adam and Eve, everybody is kicked out of the garden in perpetuity. And so, for instance, in order to get rid of Saddam Hussein, we created, as a nation, we created an embargo on medical supplies that led to the death of 750,000 Iraqi children. And when Madeleine Albright was asked about this on 60 Minutes, she was asked, was that an acceptable price to pay to get rid of Saddam Hussein? And she said, we think it is. That 750,000 kids died to get rid of this guy. So that's what I mean by corporate singularity being alive in our days. The third stage of culpability was the notion of the scapegoat, that one person has sinned, everybody has sinned, but one person is going to pay the price for everybody else. And this is actually the notion of Jesus as the scapegoat or the sacrificial lamb to change kind of species, going from goats to sheep, so that one person is going to be responsible for the guilt of everybody else. The next stage was the God is relenting and saying, I'm hereafter, I'm going to just punish until the 3rd or 4th generation. So I'm not going to punish the great-great-grandkids, only the person who sinned and the children and the grandchildren. After that, I'll relent. The 5th stage comes with Jeremiah and Ezekiel, 2 prophets Jeremiah was around 600 BCE and Ezekiel around 550 BCE. And they both quoted a Hebrew proverb that says, the parents have eaten sour grapes, but the children's teeth are set on edge. So you know the experience when you eat something sour and your teeth go kind of funny. So he's quoting this proverb and they're saying, no longer will this be true in Israel, that only the person who sins will be responsible. So this is very, very different from the notion of corporate singularity. So now it's only the individual who breaks the law is going to be responsible. But Jesus takes it 2 stages further. Jesus says, those who bind unjust laws and lay them on people's shoulders are guilty for the breaches of these sins. So he says, talking to the Pharisees, you bind heavy loads and you lay them on people's shoulders and you won't lift a single finger to help them yourself. You are guilty for their sins because you're creating ridiculous kinds of laws. And we certainly live in situations where that's true today. That would be number 6. Number 7 wasn't so much what Jesus said, but what Jesus did. That he became, in some senses, the antidote to the evil, by responding to it with love and with healing and with good news. And that's where the healing really happens for us and for our times. It's dedicating ourselves to being preachers of good news and being agents of healing. So that has to do now with the first source of evil, angering the gods. That's what I mean by that. The second source of evil then, I believe, is personal and collective karma. And I'm going to go into karma in a little bit of depth. I'm going to talk about 5 different dimensions, but in this lecture, I'm just going to mention 4 of those dimensions, and I'm going to keep dimension 5 until a future lecture, because it'll be more pertinent at that stage. So very, very basically, the most basic dimension of karma is just it's a law of cause and effect. And it's the core law of science. Every effect has a subsequent cause, and every effect has a subsequent cause. Every cause has a subsequent effect, and every effect has a cause that came before it. And that's true in science, and it's true in spirituality, and it's true in life itself. You don't look around and look at something and say, I wonder, how that happened. There's always a reason and a cause why it happened. And you never look at something you've done or said or thought and wonder, will that have an outcome or an effect? It always does. So the very basic dimension of karma is just cause and effect. A causes B, and B is caused by A. So everything we experience inside us and around us is generated by some cause. And every thought we have, every word we speak, and every action we engage in has an effect. And this effect influences the entire evolutionary trajectory of the cosmos. Let me say that again. Every single thought that you go back to again with frequency, every word you speak, and every action you engage in has an effect at a cosmic level. A great Irish scientist called John Bell discovered the law of entanglement in the 1960s when I was still in college studying physics. And entanglement is the notion that even subatomic particles that are initially paired and then sent off into different ends of the universe, and you change one of them, the other one instantaneously also makes the change. Now that's true not just at the microcosmic level of electrons or particles, it's true, I believe, in the macrocosmic world as well, that we're entangled beings. We're fractals, holographic fractals of source, and therefore anything that happens to anybody or is caused by anybody affects the entire group. So at a cosmic level, there's an effect to your thoughts, to your words, and to your actions. So this very basic law of cause and effect is as simple as a book falls off a shelf and falls and injures a sleeping cat. Your cat is sleeping under your bookshelf and a book falls off and hits the cat. That's karma, simple karma. There's a cause and there's an effect. The book fell, it hit the cat. F is equal to ma, force is equal to mass times acceleration. So you can calculate just how much pressure was on the cat when the book hit him. So that's just that's the basic dimension, cause and effect. The second dimension of karma is we have to ask ourselves the question, did it work? So we know A caused B. The next question is, if we intentionally did A, did it work? Did it actually cause B, or did it cause C instead of B? So a lion is hungry and he attacks a skunk, and the skunk bombs him and he's stinking to high heaven. And so he loses his pride. Literally, none of the other lions will go near him. And he loses pride because his dignity is shattered. So is a lion likely to go back and attack a skunk again? Absolutely not. So did it work? No, it didn't work. So what's the lion going to do? The lion is going to avoid skunks. And so the lion learns, there was the cause, here was the effect. I didn't like the effect, and therefore I'm not going to try that again. Now, So when you look at nature itself, nature is predicated and built in such a way that it favors and repeats effective patterns. This is what's sometimes called the law of natural selection and survival of the fittest. Nature always favors and repeats effective patterns. So when nature invents something and it finds out that it works and works well, it keeps repeating that kind of a system. I'll give you two simple examples. Eyes. 1 billion years ago, there was no color on planet Earth. 1 billion years ago, there was no color on planet Earth. Because 1 billion years ago, the eye had not been invented. And therefore, there was no consciousness that could infer color from the electromagnetic spectrum. So there was nothing that could see yellow daffodils or blue skies or green grass. That consciousness does not exist. And so 545 million years ago, nature invented a tiny little critter, an insect called a trilobite. And the trilobite was the first eyes on the planet. And nature saw, wow, this is a winner. You know, I'm going to keep repeating this. And subsequently, particularly all fauna, you know, whether they were insects or mammals or hominids, they all have eyes, because eye was a pattern that really, really worked. So nature kept repeating it. I'll give you a second example. The invention of family. So for a long, long time, there was no such thing as family on planet Earth. So when you think, for instance, of the reptiles, whether they're alligators, you know, or snakes or turtles, you know, they came when they were impregnated, they laid eggs and they typically buried them in the sand to keep them warm. Snakes did it in Kenya, turtles do it on beaches, crocodiles do it. And so there was no family. You just laid eggs and left them. They were left to their own devices. And so the attrition rate was huge. So you were hoping that the warm sand, you know, would birth the babies, and the babies then would make a kind of scurry for the ocean and get eaten on way. And so a nation decided, you know, there must be a better system than this. We have to come up with a different system whereby when creatures give birth, that they protect the vulnerable young. So they invented families. And the first versions of this were probably birds, where birds didn't just lay eggs, they sat in them, they nested them, they brought them food, and they protected them. And in many bird species, mama sat on the eggs, you know, kept them warm. Daddy went away and he picked up worms and brought them back to the nest and fed the young ones. So they protected the young ones. When mammals arrived, they did even further. The word mammal comes from the same word as the mammary gland. You know, that mothers fed babies from their own breasts, so from their own milk. And so now you've got a really bonding family where mother is literally feeding babies from her own young. And in this system, the mammals in which there's a male figure to protect the vulnerable mother and the vulnerable children, they thrived. And so nature kept repeating this pattern. And so with the hominids and human beings, you had this system. And in fact, the human species took it even further. You now had not just, you know, kind of nuclear families of a mother and father and the kids. You had extended family, you know, grandparents, parents, and kids. And then you had the multi-generational extended family with aunts and uncles. So it took a village to raise a baby. So the second dimension of karma is that nature asks itself the question, did this work? And if it did work, let's keep repeating that. Now, any species or any systems that don't align with this evolutionary process go extinct really quickly. Any species that doesn't, you know, create family and that doesn't look out for each other is going to go extinct. And the human species is in danger of doing that right now. Homo sapiens sapiens is in danger of going extinct. And it's not so much that there's going to be a comet that's going to destroy the planet. It's going to be a nuclear holocaust or climate disaster. So it's something we're bringing on ourselves, because it seems, you know, that natural selection, we're not selecting naturally anymore. We're selecting unnaturally. And so be aware, we're a species that could go extinct really, really quickly if we're not asking ourselves the questions, did it work and is it working? That will be the second kind of dimension of my understanding of karma. The third dimension is to ask the question, is it good or bad? Now, the fact that it works doesn't necessarily mean it's good. So it can work for some people, but not for other people. It can work for the oligarchs who are making a lot of money. You know, so, but is it good or bad? That's the third dimension of karma. And so I've told you a story one time, and if you know the answer, pardon me. I was living in a church in Palo Alto at one stage called St. Aloysius on El Camino Real. And there was a small little park nearby that I would go up to in the evening times to walk around. And one evening I'm up there and I see this adult female with two little children, a little boy who looked like he was 5 and a little girl who looked like she was 7. And they're walking through the park. And all of a sudden, a baby squirrel fell out of a pine tree in the park onto the ground. And the adult female rushed at it, caught it, and started shaking it furiously. And the kids are freaking out, saying, "Stop it, stop it, stop it." And I ran up and I tried to rescue the squirrel. And the little squirrel was dead. So I took it home to the rectory and I buried it in the backyard. It's still buried, in the backyard there, presumably. That church was bought eventually by the Ananda community. So the little squirrel is buried in the backyard. And so the question I would ask then, that behavior on the part of the adult female, was that moral or was it immoral behavior? Now, I have to give you one more piece of information. That adult female was an Alsatian dog. So it's very important before you ask the question, is it moral or is it immoral or amoral? You have to ask what species is involved. Is it a species that has an ethical code or the ability to distinguish between right and wrong? So this becomes very, very important then in our evolution, that we develop an ethic that tells us not just whether stuff works or doesn't work, but whether it's good or evil. So that would be the third dimension of my understanding of karma. And then there's a fourth dimension, and it's this: is it spiritual? Is it beyond good and bad? Is there a category beyond mere ethics? So Shakespeare would aver that there is. He would say in Hamlet, there is nothing either good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. So we are the people who create the categories of good and evil, and we lock ourselves into that kind of thinking. And Shakespeare is saying there's a place beyond that. And Rumi, who predated him by 400 years, came to the same opinion. Rumi said beautifully, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. Now, where is that field? Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing. It's a place that the mystics live in. It's a place beyond mere ethical considerations. It's a place where there's a real dialogue happening, so that by creating, synthesis, antithesis, creating thesis, antithesis, we can arrive at a synthesis. By listening to all the perspectives on the issue, we are invited into a mystical place, which is beyond mere ethical considerations. Now, ethics has to be a stage in getting there. You can't skip the ethical stage, but you can't get stuck either at mere ethics. There's a place beyond that. And that's what I meant this morning when I asked, the 4 questions: who is God? Who am I? Who is my neighbor? And what is my mission? That, karma means the ability to go beyond merely, did A cause B? Did it work? Was it good? There's a place beyond that. And in the 5th lecture, which will be on Wednesday with God's help, I'm going to talk about a 5th dimension of karma, because it'll be more appropriate at that stage. So that's my thinking. That's the second source then. Karma is the second source of evil, as far as I'm concerned. The third source of evil, I believe, then, is the influence of the powers of the heavens. And this morning I touched lightly upon that. This was the teaching of Jesus, and this was the teaching of St. Paul. This notion that there are forces out there that are intervening in human affairs. Now, so that there are some kind of non-terrestrial energies or entities that are part of the equation. If we believe, as the scripture tells us, that we're created in the image and likeness of some kinds of extraterrestrials, whether you call them gods or simply, ETs, whatever, that's somebody else is involved in Project Planet Earth and has been for possibly millions of years. Now, are they extraterrestrials or are they extra-dimensionals, or are they both? And there's a difference. Extraterrestrials would be physical beings that come from other solar or star systems, and so they will have physicality. They may look very different from us. And there have been various groups kind of described, like reptilians or insectoids or, Nordics that look more like humans, but that there may be other physical beings out there much more advanced than we. So when you think about it, that planet Earth and our solar system is only 4.6 billion years old, and life on our planet is only 3.7 billion years old. There are parts of our cosmos which are 13.8 billion years old, which means that there are solar systems in our universe which are literally 3 times older than planet Earth. And we know that there are more solar systems in the known cosmos than there are grains of sand on all the beaches and all the deserts of planet Earth. So to think that we're the only intelligent life form in the cosmos is ludicrous. So obviously there are beings out there much, much more advanced than we. And the question is, are they benign or malignant? And are they involved in human affairs? You listen to the teaching of Jesus or Paul or many of the great mythologies, and they all say yes. They've intervened in our genetic manipulation, and they've created the Garden of Eden, and they continue to intervene in various ways. Now, are there some of those then who are a source of darkness and evil to our planet? I want to use a few analogies I've used before. It amazes me that people can pay hundreds of dollars to go to an arena watching 2 guys and even now 2 girls in a ring beating the crap out of each other in a boxing match and shouting, "Go get him, kill the bastard." And the 2 people in the ring, the more they beat up on each other, the more the crowd is shouting. Now what's happening here? That somehow energetically and emotionally, the audience is feeding off the distress and the punishment that these 2 people are experiencing. I mean, I can't figure that out for the life of me. That people are getting emotionally high on the suffering being visited upon 2 other human beings, and they're encouraging them to do it even more. Or you take innocent animals like dogs or roosters and you have them kill each other and you put bets on it. So you watch the distress and the pain and the discomfort of fellow creatures and you get off on it emotionally. Now, are there either other extraterrestrials out there or extra dimensionals, those who don't have physical articulation, but who are living at other frequencies that are not physical frequencies, but no less intelligent, or advanced? Are there beings out there who are actually feeding off the distress of human beings? And are they encouraging warfare? Now, I'm sure many of you have come across in your own life, even people on planet, and we come across this in psychology. In psychology, these people are called sometimes facetiously psychic vampires. That there are some people and they go into a room and they suck the energy out of the system. They're so narcissistic that it's all about them, and they want to visit all their problems. They want to dump them on you and then walk away, somehow relieved of their problem, and now you're carrying their crap for them. And they're known in the literature as psychic vampires. Now, are there psychic vampires who are doing this on a global level? Are there even human beings, oligarchs of some kind, who are literally other human beings who are feeding off the distress of fellow human beings and who seem to be inured to the suffering they're causing and the fact that decisions they're making are occasioning the death of literally hundreds of millions of fellow human beings? And has this been orchestrated from elsewhere? And so that for me would be a third reason. And the longer I live, the more I'm inclined to believe that this is a major factor in our world right now, and one that has to be taken cognizance of. That would even be the third influence. The fourth influence I see is a free will allied to advancing technology. And so science and technology have brought us extraordinary benefits. And also there's a huge cost to all of these. So we have nowadays a science without conscience. And this is a play on words in Latin, because in Latin, the word for science is scientia, and the word for conscience is conscientia. And conscientia literally, scientia means knowledge or science, and conscientia means that which goes along with science. Con meaning with, conscientia, that which goes along with science. So scientific advance is meant to be commensurate with ethical and moral evolution as well. But we're not getting that. We're getting science without a conscience. So it's like, instead of saying, if we can, we do, we should be asking, if we can, should we? So the very fact that we can means we immediately say, okay, we'll do, no matter what the consequences are. Instead of saying, if we can, should we? And so we look at all the great decisions, the creation of the nuclear bomb in the late 1940s. We can do that. Should we do that? So we have to ask that question constantly. There are things we're capable of doing now scientifically, bioengineering of various kinds, geoengineering of various kinds. The question is, we can do it. Should we be doing it? So we have a science without conscience, leading to, for many, many people, life without meaning, a meaningless existence. We have a technology without any ethics and leading to greed without compassion. If we can make $1 billion out of it, tough luck, if it's going to cause the death of, 2 million children in sub-Saharan Africa. And tough luck, they just happen to be born in the wrong place at the wrong time. So free will allied to developing technology, for me, is another great source of evil in our world. The fifth great source, I believe, is the utter secularization of our times, the loss of spirituality, the notion that God is dead. And not because source was a fabricated illusion, but because we have lulled our inner divinity to sleep under the onslaught of consumerism. So God is dead because we have been lulled into the false gods of, rampant consumerism. We got to have more and better versions of everything immediately, no matter what the cost is. So our gods become our technology in some sense. Now, properly understood, evolution is meant to be not just a morphological or intellectual advancement. By morphology, I mean the life forms. That it's not just we're going to develop opposable big toes. So it's not just a physical evolution. It's not just intellectual evil, but there has to be a spiritual and a mystical evolution. So instead of abandoning kind of corrupt religious systems, we need to transcend corrupt religious systems and move into mystical spirituality instead of just dogmatic religion. But we have thrown the baby out with the bath water. And so we've abandoned religion, which for all its excesses and all its problems was providing some kind of connection and some kind of reminder that we are more than our spacesuits, that life is more than conception to death. There's a lot more to life than that. So that would be, for me, a fifth factor of understanding evil in our times. I want to emphasize then for myself that God did not create evil. I mean, by God, no, I mean real God. I mean, she who is the transcendent, ineffable ground of our being, not the God we've created in our own image and likeness. So the sixth source of evil then, I believe, is what I call evil as an emergent phenomenon. And by emergence, I mean this, that emergence is a phenomenon in which the total is greater than the sum of the parts, in which, the outcome is never predictable from just examining the separate pieces. So emergence comes from elements which before they're combined could never clue you in as to what you might expect when they actually get together. And my favorite example is you look at the cosmos, and for billions of years, hydrogen and oxygen existed as separate entities. They had never got together. You could never have predicted by looking at hydrogen and oxygen that if you put them together, you get a third phenomenon, which we call water, H2O, 2 molecules of hydrogen and 1 molecule of oxygen, creating this extraordinary, phenomenon that we call water. You could never have predicted it. So emergence is where you put together discrete, separate parts, and you arrive at an outcome which you could not have predicted from the separate pieces. Now, this is the sense in which evil comes into being. Not because it was a pre-existing phenomenon that God forced upon us. God did not create pre-existing evil. It came in an emergent fashion. And I'm going to give you just a few analogies I've used over the years. If you go to the shop and you buy a jigsaw puzzle, let's say it's a big jigsaw puzzle, 5,000 pieces, and you come home and there's a picture on the cover of the box. Do you know what that this is the finished product is going to look like this? You take off the wrapping paper, you open the box, you spill all the pieces up onto the table. And the first thing you have to do is turn all the pieces right side up, because the back side is just cardboard, just brown cardboard. You're not going to be able to see the picture from that. So you have got to set them up right. The second thing you'll typically do is you'll separate the 4 corner pieces. That's going to give you an idea. Then you look for all the straight lines. That will give you a kind of an outline. And thereafter, you've got 3 clues when you're assembling the jigsaw puzzle. The first is the colors As you look at the box, you're going to look at particular colors that are going to go together. And then the contours, do the pieces configure well? If they don't fit together, they don't belong together. And then the third piece, there's the box. There's what it should look like when it's finished. And so you proceed with your jigsaw puzzle. But after 4 or 5 days, you're totally frustrated. And instead of having a flat surface with the picture, you got this crumpled 3-dimensional version, and there's lots of spaces, and there's lots of pieces left over, and you're tearing your hair out. Now, that version of the jigsaw puzzle was not a pre-existing pattern. It did not come with instructions that showed you how to create that lumpy model with holes and pieces left over. That's because you didn't do it properly. So that's what I mean by an emergent phenomenon. The buckled jigsaw puzzle came not because it was a pre-existing pattern, but because you didn't know how to do it properly. And that's how evil emerges. It's because we're not doing life properly. That would be a source of it. Another analogy I've used in Kenya, very, very often watching at water holes, watching the animals gather to drink water. And you get all kinds of animals, lions and zebras and wildebeest and elephants and snakes and cows of various kinds. And it would fascinate me that I watch a cow coming up to the water and a snake coming up to the water, and they're both drinking the same water. And the cow turns the water into milk to feed her young, and the snake turns the water, the very same water, into venom to poison her adversaries or her victims. Now, in the very same way, we all drink from the same water. It's called life. But it is not life that creates the problems. It's how we process our experiences that creates the problems. What do we do with the water of the experience of life? Are we turning it into venom to create enemies and kill them? Or are we creating milk in order to feed our young? And so it's an emergent phenomenon. It's coming from the way in which we process our experiences, not from the experiences per se, and not even from life itself. I've used the example of this beautiful poem that reminded me of my grandfather, Daddy Jim, who was a consummate musician. He played the fiddle and the squeeze box and the tin whistle and the clarinet and the concert flute. And, he loved the fiddle, particularly an old fiddle. And there's this great story called The Touch of the Master's Hand about an auction in which, the auctioneer is auctioning off a whole bunch of useless items. And he picks up this old, violin, and he says, "What am I bid for this violin? $1? $2? $2 going once. $2. My bid $3. Anybody? $3? $2 once. $2 twice. Hold it. There's an old man comes up from the back of the room, and he asks to take the violin, and he puts it on his neck, and he fiddles with the strings a little bit, takes the bow, and he starts playing, and everybody is rapt. He plays this extraordinary music, and then he gives it back, and he walks out of the room, and everybody is stunned. And finally, the auctioneer picks up the bow, and the fiddler says, "What am I bid for this fiddle? $1,000, $2,000, $2,000 going one, $2,000 going twice." And then the question is, what changed the value of the violin? It's exactly the same violin. And the answer was the touch of the master's hand. And that's what life is about. There is no such thing as pre-existing evil, really. It is about how we work with the experiences we're having. We take the violin given us by life, and we create cacophony, or we create symphony from it. So that's what I mean by evil as an emergent phenomenon. What are we doing with the experiences that life is giving us because we volunteered to be here now? That would be a sixth source of evil as far as I'm concerned. The number 7 would be evil as service to self. So when you look at human performance, our behavior, whether it's our thoughts or our words or our actions, always lie in a spectrum. I call it A Street and B Street. And at A Street, you have ultimate narcissism, that we're always acting in service to the self. And at the other end of it, you have ultimate compassion, which is service to others. I'm going to call that B Street. And every thought, every word, and every deed situates us someplace on that spectrum. Now, we tend to move backwards and forwards but that we have a center of gravity. Most of us have a center of gravity someplace along that spectrum. Now, as little newborns, we have to begin at A Street level. If we weren't total narcissists, we could not survive childhood. You know, we need air, and we need food, and we need mother's milk, and we need to be held and cuddled and cherished. Otherwise, we couldn't survive. But if I'm in my 40s or 50s and I'm still totally self-engrossed, there's something really wrong with the equation. If we camp out at the end, the A Street end, what was survival needs becomes selfishness. Selfishness becomes greed. Greed becomes fear. Fear becomes anger. Anger becomes violence. And now evil has arrived fully. So that's at the individual level. So we have to ask ourselves the question, where am I landing, on this spectrum in my life at this stage? Now, there's a cosmic dimension to this as well. In 1964, a brilliant Russian astrophysicist called Nikolai Kardashev created what he called a typology of cosmic civilizations. And he posited that because of the absolute plethora of life existing in other parts of the cosmos, there must be at least 3 types of civilizations. Now, I believe actually there are 5. So I add 2 to his typology. So type 1, he called civilizations that are able to use their planetary resources ecologically in order to meet all of their energy needs. So for us on planet Earth, there would be being able to use the waves and the wind and the sun and volcanoes and even earthquakes in order to create energy for our planet, which is renewable. Now, that's a type 1 civilization. He was asked, what level are we at? He says, we're at type 0. And the movement from a type 0 to a type 1 is really, really, really dangerous, because in that transition, you develop all kinds of, energy systems that could literally destroy the entire planet. So type 1 is a civilization that has learned how to ecologically use its planetary resources to meet all its needs. A type 2 civilization, he believed, was a civilization that could do that with its whole solar system. So in our case, it would be that we could use not just sunlight, but the energy of Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto and Neptune for our own needs on planet Earth, without ever destroying those other planets or planet Earth. That would be a type 2. A type 3, he believed, was a galactic civilization that could harness the energies of an entire galaxy. So for us, it would be being able to harvest the entire Milky Way galaxy to meet our needs on planet Earth without destroying any of these resources. Now, I think that there's probably a type 4, which is capable of doing that for the entire cosmos, and a type 5 that could do that for parallel universes. Now, wherever you land on that understanding, what happens when those civilizations also land on the same spectrum of service to self versus service to others? Now, if you get an extraordinarily advanced civilization, which is literally, and I mean literally, billions of years more evolved than planet Earth, and they're in service to self, and that planet Earth is simply a resource, or it's in the way. They're driving a big highway through the Milky Way galaxy, and we happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and we're going to get bulldozed out of it somehow. So what would happen if one of these civilizations were in service to self, and we were just in their way, and they wanted to get rid of us? And so they created a system where we would literally destroy ourselves. They'd give us a suicide pill so they didn't have to do the dirty work themselves. Now, is that then what Jesus was talking about, or what St. Paul was talking about? Paul says very famously, I quoted this morning in his letter to the Ephesians in chapter 6, where he says, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Now, what if, in fact, there exists such entities, and what if, for whatever reason, for pure pleasure, like people who are at boxing matches or dogfighting or whatever, what if they're literally just feeding off our discontent, and that the energy of suffering literally, gets them high? They're literally addicted, to the highs created by the suffering of other species. So that would be a source 7 for me. And source number 8 would be the notion of projection. Carl Jung came up with this extraordinary notion that one of the most important archetypes in the human psyche is the shadow archetype. And he pointed out it's very important to realize that the shadow is 80% gold. It is 80% unrealized potential. And it is 20% unacknowledged personal darkness. And so rather than, develop our own talents, we project our idealism onto our heroes and our heroines, and we watch them on television. So I'm sitting, on my couch with my bag of Taylor, Chris, what do you call him here? I'm using the Irish word. I can't remember what it is. Potato chips. You're eating your potato chips and you're surfing the web and you're watching, a tennis match, or basketball. We're into March Madness now. And instead of becoming an athlete yourself, you're lying on the couch, lazy as be damned, eating your chips, but you're projecting your idealism onto these heroes and heroines. Or on the other side, instead of recognizing your own dark material, you project it onto somebody else and they become the enemy figure. Now, when you do this as an individual, when you project your individual shadow material onto another individual, then you're going to have lots of interpersonal conflict because you're going to see in the others what you fail to see in yourself. When we do this as communities, when an entire community projects its own unacknowledged darkness onto another community, then you get prejudices of various kinds. When we do this as an entire nation, then you got propaganda and you got war, and then we're going to spend trillions of dollars killing other people's babies in other parts of the world. And when we do this as an entire species, then we become a malignant tumor on the etheric body of the planet. Now, it's interesting that for Carl Jung, he pointed out that projection actually is a very important, psychological mechanism because it allows you to see clearly what's inside. But it's only the first part of a two-part process. The second part is having projected it in order to see it clearly, you now need to introject or retroject it because you realize it's not happening out there, it's happening back here. And I've used the example of you go to a movie theater. And as little kids, we'd go to a movie theater in Cork City called the Lido. And they had a matinee performance every Saturday morning for little kids. And the price of admission was 2 milk bottles. You washed out the milk bottles and you had 2 milk bottles and you got into the movie. And there were just wooden benches and a big white concrete wall. And it was projected onto that. And we'd be watching cowboy movies. And when the bad guy came on and the good guy didn't know that he was being stalked, we'd have our pockets full of stones and we take our stones out and we start pelting the screen. Look out behind you, look out. And then the lights would come on and some big burly steward would come in and randomly pick 2 or 3 kids and fire their asses out of the cinema. And then we'll all go quiet. And then when the movie would start up again, and after 5 more minutes, when the good guy didn't realize the bad guy was catching up with him, we take out our stone and start again. Now that's projection. We really thought we could intervene, that the action was happening up there and that we could influence the outcome. Now that's what projection means. It's happening back up in the projectionist box. But it'd be really, really boring to go back up, to take a roll of film, to go through it frame by frame by frame, 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch. It's a really boring way to see the movie. You're seeing the same movie, but it's really, really difficult. So now to make it easy, you're going to shine a white light through it, project it onto a screen, which now creates a 40-foot by 30-foot image. You're creating motion and time and movement. And you think it's happening up there. Roy Rogers is now riding across the stage on a white horse. That's a projection that's happening up there. So once we projected our material onto somebody else, or some other culture, or some other nation, or some other species, we have to realize we're only at the first part of the process. We're projecting these tiny little things inside our psyches so we can see it more clearly, so we can own it and take it back and work with it. And when we don't work with it, here's what happens. So I'm going to end the lecture part with an image, a very powerful image. There's a garbage patch in the middle of the Pacific Ocean called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And because of the nature of the tides in the Pacific, the kind of the gyroscopic motion of the tides that kind of spiral into a center, all of the garbage which is dumped off the east coast of Asia and the west coast of North America, together with stuff that's dumped off ocean-going ships, is all constellating and is gathering in this huge, huge big patch which is bigger than the state of Texas right now. And depending how you measure it, it could actually be as big as the United States of America, depending whether you're looking at pellet-sized, plastics or looking at big plastic bottles. And the fish are eating that. And they're passing on to other carnivores who are eating those fish, and they're passing on to us. And those pristine, fish that you're eating in the stores, you got to Safeway or whatever, you're recycling the garbage that's been dumped off the west coast of America and the east coast of Asia. Now, that, it seems to me, is what happens when, as an entire species, Homo sapiens sapiens refuses to acknowledge its own shadow material and dumps it onto nature. You can't dump anything. It's ridiculous to think you can dump anything. Where are you going to dump it? It's the same planet. So now we're going to go to Mars and recreate it. We're going to use that as a dump, or we're going to go live in Mars and we're going to kind of create a dump out of Mars. And then we're going to go further and create other dumps someplace else until finally we've destroyed the solar system. And then we're going to go further to other solar systems and find other kind of, garbage dumps that we can dump our material in. And not just dump our material, but dump our way of life, our being, our mindset, and our warfare. So it's up to us at this stage to acknowledge, to look at these sources of evil as I've outlined them, and you have to do your own thinking. Obviously, I didn't cover the entire thing. There are other sources of this as well, and you've got to put together your own kind of theory on evil. And once you've done that, you then have to figure out where do you lie as far as your responsibility, because you volunteered to be here now. But in order to be effective, you have to understand what the situation is, what the antecedent causes are, and what the possible ways of healing it might be. Namaste. It's a great question. So let me give you the historical background to the notion of the scapegoat. It was in effect when the Israelites are in the desert and the priesthood has been created. Aaron is the first high priest, who was Moses' brother, his elder brother. And the system was that every year, all of the people would come individually to confess their sins to Aaron. Mm-hmm. And then Aaron took all these sins upon himself. And then they would take a spotless a goat from their herds and impose hands on the goat and confess the sins of the entire people onto the goat. And then the goat was sent off into the desert to be killed, obviously, by a lion of some kind or a predator of some kind. And so the idea was that somehow on an annual basis, that the entire nation would be exculpated and all their sin would be carried by some other creature. Now, as you rightly mentioned then, Ezekiel and Jeremiah said, no, that's not how the system works. The system is that individuals must take responsibility for their own breaches of the law. And Jesus would go further, but Christianity would then take up this notion. And like many things in the life of Christ, metaphors he uses are misunderstood and interpreted literally. Mm. So when at the beginning of John's gospel, there's a story where John the Baptist, who has his own disciples, and has just baptized Jesus in the Jordan. And he's talking with two of his disciples, John the Evangelist, and was it Andrew, the brother of Peter, and they're talking about the coming Mashiach, the Messiah. And all of a sudden, John looks and says, "There is the Lamb of God." The two guys are looking at him, and they're watching this figure walk away, and they're wondering, "Wow!" And they follow him, and he sees these two guys following him. He says, "What do you want?" And they're stuck for, what are they going to say? They say, "Rabbi, where do you live?" Well, that's a very interesting question, because it doesn't just mean, where's your kip? Where's your hut? Where's your home? What's your address? They're not asking that question really. They're asking, where do you live? What's your cosmology? What's your teaching? What can you impart to us? And he says, "Come and see." And he's not just bringing them to his hut. He's bringing them into a conversation about the cosmologies. Now, the notion that John the Baptist uses, there goes the Lamb of God. Now, John obviously is using this metaphorically, but the Christian churches would then take this up and they'll use it as a kind of a literal translation. So if Jesus is the Lamb of God, then Holy Communion is actually eating mutton. Mm. When you eat when you consume the Eucharist on Sunday, you're eating a piece of mutton. So why is it that we take some of these metaphors literally and some kind of just symbolically? So the Lamb of God is a hearkening back to the notion of the scapegoat. Here is somebody who's prepared to dedicate his life to the healing of the results of sin in the world. It's not that the Father demanded a sacrifice and said, I want a sinless being, and I need my blood back. I need my pound of flesh. In fact, I need my 150 pounds of flesh. I need to kill an entire human being, a sinless human being, because I'm really upset with you guys. And unless I can shed the blood of an innocent victim, I'm not going to be satisfied. And Satan says, okay, you got a deal. I'll give them all back to you if you give me your son. Now, that's a ludicrous notion. And so it's not that Jesus is the Lamb of God in any kind of a technical sense that suddenly he's taking the sins of everybody and nobody now has to deal with their own material. He's saying, this is what it looks like to live in total alignment with God, to be the scapegoat, because every single one of us is the scapegoat. Everybody who volunteered to be here now is the Lamb of God. You have dedicated your life to living in such a way that you're going to heal the planet, that you're going to be a preacher of good news, that your life and your thoughts and your words and your actions are going to be healing in themselves, that you're going to call people into wakefulness, that you're going to call your culture into wakefulness, that you're going to call your species into wakefulness, not just by what you say and what you preach, but by who you are and how you relate. You're meant to be the Lamb of God. He was the Lamb of God. You're the Lamb of God. I agree totally with you. So I just want to pick up on that metaphor again of the jigsaw puzzle, because in life, when you buy a jigsaw puzzle, the big jigsaw puzzle of life, you have to make 2 acts of faith. You have to believe that every piece that's there is necessary, and every piece that's necessary is there. God never gives you a jigsaw puzzle from which there are missing pieces, or extra pieces. You have the ideal resources to meet the life that you're responsible for. You're not responsible for the world. You're responsible to the world, but not for the world. You're responsible for playing your part. And so every single one of us in our own personal life, even if things aren't working out for us, we have all the resources we need to meet the life that we've volunteered for. And even if it appears at times that we've made mistakes and our jigsaw puzzle isn't turning out right, we have to make the act of faith that God never sends us on a mission for which the pieces are not provided and there are no extra pieces. If you get to your life, end of your life, your jigsaw puzzle, and there are pieces left over, there's something wrong. Somebody put pieces in the box that didn't belong to the picture. Or if you come to the end of the jigsaw puzzle, you've used up all the pieces and there are still holes in it, you don't have the right jigsaw puzzle. But I guarantee you that there is nobody in life who is working on a jigsaw puzzle for which all the pieces have not been provided, and only the pieces which are necessary have been provided. And some of those pieces are going to look like a dark material, and they're part of the jigsaw puzzle. You can't create a 3-dimensional effect on a 2-dimensional surface without there being shadows built into the picture. And sometimes when we're placing the shadow pieces, it seems like they shouldn't belong to it. But shadows just simply tell us that there's an obstacle in the path of the light. And the question becomes, am I being an obstacle to the path of the life in my life or in other people's lives? But no matter what I'm faced with in life, it is my life. And it's the only life I have. And it's the only jigsaw puzzle I can work on. And we have to make an act of faith that God does never sends anybody on a mission for which she has not provided all of the pieces. And it is not up to us to fix the world even in our lifetimes. Our job is to contribute. There's levels of the jigsaw puzzle. There are fractals. A fractal is a pattern that recurs at an infinite number of scales. There's the personal jigsaw puzzle of my life, for which I've been given all the resources I need. I'm part of a bigger jigsaw puzzle of my culture, a bigger one still of my nation or of my species. And I can only do my piece of the puzzle. And it may take generations before we figure it all out. But the ego wants me to do it in my time, in my way. I want to see this problem solved while I'm alive, and I want it to happen in a specified way that I dictate to God. We do it in God's time, in God's way, and one person, as Paul says, sows, another person weeds, and a third person harvests. We may not be the people who harvest, as long as we're prepared to sow the seed, and that's our job. Let's be happy to do our job. I love that. Obviously, you can push a metaphor any way you want. I'm using this metaphor precisely to talk about the idea of emergence. So you can't take any metaphor, and try to use it in a different situation and point out the inadequacies of the metaphor for a different situation. You're absolutely right. It could be an art form. I'm using it precisely to say that you have come with a particular purpose for which you've been given all the pieces. And there's a picture on the cover of the box. And in some senses, it's the face of God. And you're meant to recreate the face of God in your life. And it's going to look very, very different for each one of us because we're all on a different mission. But we can do it well or we can do it badly. And when I talk about emergence, this was just one of 8 different sources. So we can't say that emergence is the only origin of evil. There are the other 7 as well. So this is a particular version or a particular kind of source. So it has to be taken as one among many, not that as the only explanation. It may be a work of art, and if that's what's worked for you, and you're creating art in your life, in other words, you're living your life in a way in which society might regard as, strange, but you're doing it out of love, and you're being a healing presence in the life, and you're being creative in the life. Others will judge it as bad art, or some people will say it's a work of genius. Great. And so I want to broaden the puzzle right now. So these are all pieces of the puzzle and they're all correct. So you can see, a puzzle piece is that out beyond right doing and wrong doing, there's a field I'll meet you there. That's about mysticism. That's part of the bigger puzzle. There's, the fact that if you do the jigsaw puzzle wrongly, you're going to be frustrated and people looking at it are going to say, no, that doesn't look very, very nice. So you have to look at the bigger level. So look at the puzzle as a fractal itself. At a different scale, and at one scale is talking about your personal life, at another scale is talking about your culture, another scale is talking about your species, and so you have to realize that it's that particular statement of Rumi is a single piece in a much greater jigsaw puzzle. So we have to be prepared to engage with the jigsaw puzzle at many, many different levels of the hologram. I'll just make one quick response to one of the items you mentioned because we're out of time. So the notion of communication. With my clients over the years as a psychologist, I had 10 rules for good communication that I would always use, particularly when I'm working with couples, but I just truncate it and use the first 4 and we'll end with that. It was tips I picked up from attending powwows, Native American Indian powwows. There are 4 rules to a powwow. You show up, you pay attention, you speak your truth without judging, attacking, or blaming, and you detach from the outcome. And that for me seems to be the essence of dialogue, that you have to show up. If you refuse to dialogue with people, there can be no resolution of differences. You have to really listen with your body language, with your eyes, with everything else. There's a difference in Buddhism between harsh gaze and soft gaze. Harsh gaze is where you're attacking somebody with your eyes, and soft gaze is where you're embracing somebody with your eyes. You have to listen with your body language, that you're facing, that your heart is open, that you're not, doing this. And you have to make sure that, you're not attacking or blaming or judging them, as you speak your truth. And that finally you're not attached to a particular outcome. That if it's a real dialogue, both parties should be learning and growing and changing a little bit.